Thank you very much for the honor to be the last person to close this round table. And I hope to draw your attention to Russian monetary system. And the topic of my presentation is monetary laws that were enacted mainly during the first half of the 19th century. That is starting at 1800 and till 1855. This is the period of the reign of Alexander I and Nicholas I. So I'm not going to touch the monetary laws that were enacted afterwards and that were mainly leading to the gold standard, but the laws that were mainly leading to the silver standard in Russia. And I would like to highlight a very interesting fact that for Russia, there was a period of 29 years until we reached the silver standard. Since the first attempt, we tried to make a silver standard. So it took us at least 29 years. And this is the plan of my presentation. So the first point is the main financial drawbacks that were faced by Alexander I, that were inherited by him, taken by him from his predecessors. Then second point is the monetary laws that were enacted during the reign of Alexander I, mainly initiated by Secretary of State Mikhail Speransky, who was actually the second person after the emperor. He was responsible for everything happening in Russia except for military matters. And the second person is Dmitry Guryev, who was the Minister of Finance, working at the same time of Mikhail Speransky. And he was actually he was making a counter-action to everything that was made by Mikhail Speransky. The third point is devoted to the monetary laws that were enacted during the period of Nicholas I. And outstanding person, Igor Kankrin, and his follower, Fyodor Vronchenko. Both of them were ministers of finance. And the last point is mainly the conclusions. So the financial situation that was inherited by Alexander I is even from objective judgment, and was even from objective judgment in terrible condition. And first of all, the unsecured assignations, so unsecured paper money, that were issued during the reign of Catherine II, his grandmother, were amounting more than 100 millions, as well as during the reign of his father, were amounting almost to 2 million rubles. And next is the budget deficit, which was very characteristic to the 19th century, and we were always in the minus balance, and our revenues were always on lower level than our costs. And the budget deficit mainly started during the reign of Catherine II, and then it was enforced by Paul I, the father of Alexander I. And surely the debts that were also accompanying Russian financial situation and were amounting to more than 200 million rubles during the reign of Paul I. So once Alexander I has taken the reign, he was quite in a difficult situation when at least 3 financial diseases were occurring in Russia, that is, debts to be covered, and a very high amount of unsecured paper money, and budget deficit, so imbalance between costs and revenues. Moreover, this was a period of war pressures, as my colleague has already told you, and as well as very poor legislative framework. The first code of laws started to exist in 1830. Moreover, Russia had slavery, great social inequality, as well as, in general, people were in antagonistic mood towards everything that was happening in minds of emperors, of ministers. People were not ready to changes. So this was a very hard situation that had to be solved. The problems had to be solved. And so I would like to draw attention to the main weaknesses of Russian, particularly monetary system. First of all, the unsecured assignations. They significantly exceeded the amount of metal money, and it could have been not that bad if they were collateralized by any metal fund. But since 1786, Catherine II decided that we don't need any metal fund, any copper fund to collateralize our assignations. She was influenced by the opinion of Earl Shuvalov, her personal advisor, saying that the printing of just unsecured papers will increase our credit and will increase our welfare. And everyone decided that it could be really good for revenues and good for balance, because in assignations, definitely the figures are much better than in metal money. Secondly, they started to print assignations in unlimited amounts, so that if they don't need any metal fund to collateralize the assignations, they started to print in an unlimited amount. Once we have a budget deficit, the only solution is to print the paper money to cover it. Once we have a war, we print again the assignations to cover the war expenses. And furthermore, once they started to print unlimited amounts of assignations, the assignations normally started to decrease in their value. And people started to lose their trust in the paper money for sure, because they bring no real value to people. It's just papers that are said to be trusted by the state. And this word is not that seen. One more weakness of monetary system was the instability of small change copper and silver coins. Another characteristic of that period was that each emperor was changing the weight of small silver and copper coins depending on what was the aim: to increase the revenues, to increase the amount of money circulating in the state. And they were, I can probably show you this interesting table, the value of small change copper coin in rubles made out of 1 pud of copper. So these are small change coins, and you can see the dynamics. So amount of rubles out of 1 pud, which is 16 kilograms. It was changing from time to time depending on the interest. And the result was people felt the inconsistency of the wishes of the state, and they started to save full-weighted coins and to use light-weighted coins, to use, well, bad money. And the state started to receive their taxes in small change copper and silver coins, which was quite natural. And so this was also the weakness of monetary system that Alexander I had to face. And two more points are not to be missed. Inadequacy of metal money. Surely there was inadequacy of metal money, otherwise there wouldn't be any need to print so many assignations to the economy. And besides, one more motive to stop collateralizing the paper money was that we were not able to produce enough amount of copper coins to collateralize the assignations. Once the assignation bank started to have a lot of branches all over the country, and you definitely remember that Russia is very, very big country. So once the assignation bank started to have a lot of branches all over the country, it started to be hard to bring the copper fund to each branch in order to collateralize the paper money. So this was a general problem, that we didn't have enough metal coins in circulation, enough to meet all the demands for transactions and deals all over the country. And surely there was no single legal tender. Everything could be paid in different coins, in silver, copper, in assignations. Well, we had bills of exchange, but in very, very limited amounts, so they were insignificant. And so by legislation, nobody was saying what is a legal tender. So the first person who was trying to change the situation was Mikhail Speransky, and I've put only 3 years of his career when he started to be the Secretary of State. He did a great job, not only to monetary system, but altogether to all finances all over the country, as well as administration, tax system, and tariff policy. He was doing a great job. But from the very beginning, all his approaches were approached with huge skepticism, huge distrust, especially among his colleagues. So I would like to draw attention to the monetary laws that were initiated according to the plan of finance that Ala Sheptun was telling about, the theoretical plan of finance, and these are the real laws that were enacted, and they were actually real for 3 years. So I would like to tell you the logics of this law. So the idea of Speransky was, first of all, to do something with assignations that were in so unlimited amount. So he decided to say that an assignation is a state debt, first of all, and it is collateralized by everything, by the state itself. He wanted to limit the amount of assignations, so he has put the maximum level of 577 million of assignations in the economy. Next step was to increase the value of assignations because they were decreasing constantly, and he was about to gradually reduce the amount, to take the assignations out of the economy. For this purpose, he decided to take internal loan in the form of bonds, and partially formed by bonds, and partially formed by selling off the state property. And finally, the last manifesto you can see was a new monetary system under which he was proclaiming a Russian silver ruble as being the legal tender. So since that year, we started to have the silver standard. And all other coins were pegged to silver. And according to this manifesto, there were 3 groups of coins: trade coin, which was a silver ruble and half a silver ruble, then small silver coins and small copper coins. It is curious that we actually had gold coins, and they were circulating somehow around the country, but they were in very, very small amount. And according to this manifesto, there was a small sentence saying that gold is pegged according to the comparable value to silver, and nothing else. And the gold was not even put in these groups of coins. But unfortunately, all his attempts were deemed to fail, were reversed. And these are the factors that were contributing to the failure of reform. First of all, the losses due to war burden, that we always had to, we had this need to print the assignations, unfortunately. And once the need emerged in 1810, they started to print additional 46 million rubles of assignations, and this actually reversed the laws that were already initiated. This was against the laws. Second was that the capital for debt repayment, this capital that was formed by bonds and by selling of the state property, was raised in a smaller than expected amount. So he couldn't fully put into life this law that was trying to reduce the amount of assignations, because the capital for debt repayment was smaller. And moreover, the capital was later used under the pressure of emperor and under the pressure of other officials. This capital was used to cover just common state expenses, which was also reversing the implications of the laws that Speransky has already initiated. Next is the participation of Russian Continental system, under which we had to interrupt the trade relations with England, and this spoiled our trade balance because we were depending on that, on the inflows of metal coinage from England, as well as the interruption of bread export to Turkey after the Russian-Turkish War. So this also spoiled our trade balance. And the year of 1811 was known for huge fires, huge diseases and problems in Russia, and they had to issue additional 3 million rubles of assignations. And again, it reversed all the implications that were written in the manifesto. And finally, the assignation, the decrease of assignation ruble was still in process. And he couldn't do anything because he couldn't reduce the amount of assignations. He was opposed by other officials that were interested in printing additional paper money. But even with these factors, I still do believe that if there were no subjective factors, if there were no personal disbeliefs in things he did, I think that we could have had silver standards since 1810. But unfortunately, the Minister of Finance, who was widely supported by Speransky, he was among those who stopped the action of the laws that Speransky enacted. While Speransky was in 1812, he was asked to go out of Moscow, as it was usually done in Russia. Oh my God, 5 minutes. So the laws that were primarily made by Guriev were really different from what Speransky wanted. What he has done, he has taken unsecured paper money and made it as a legal tender. So he made a legal tender, just paper money, and you had to pay taxes and make deals and transactions in paper money. And well, maybe it was because of a war, as Vladimir had told you, and maybe it was for interest of upper classes that had to pay taxes for slaves in cheaper money. And the other point, he was initiating the laws that had to reduce the volume of legal tender because he realized that assignations were still losing their value, and he started to take out the assignations again. But still there was no result, unfortunately, because this was a legal tender. People needed assignations to pay the taxes, and at the same time, these were the papers. They had no real value, so the assignations didn't go up in the value. In order to correct all that, the finally Minister of Finance Kankarin started to initiate the monetary laws that finally brought us to silver standard. And what he has done, he has fixed the value of assignation ruble so that nobody could quote it in different exchange rates as it was happening in Russia. And moreover, he allowed to pay taxes and assignations, but first of all, you could pay taxes in silver and platinum coins. And platinum coins were, for a short period, they were in circulation in Russia. Then what he did, in order to reduce the amount of assignations, he initiated new instruments, new means of payments. The treasury bills that raised the revenues of the government, the deposit notes that raised the metal fund, and this metal fund were used to back the credit notes that were directly exchanged, that were directly substituting the assignations out of the economy. And this what happened. There was a devaluation of assignations. Instead of nearly 6 million assignations, he brought into economy almost 2 million credit notes. It doesn't mean that he stopped the paper money in the economy. And strictly speaking, he believed that paper money is a good thing for Russia because we were too big and we still had not enough metal coinage. And he thought that paper money is definitely not the debt of the government, rather than a kind of implicit taxation imposed by the state. So finally, the paper money that were circulating in Russia was the treasury bills, the credit notes, and even instead of credit notes were later substituting also the deposit notes. So two types of paper money and metal coins as well. And still he was a person who brought the system to more or less order. And we had silver standard. He proclaimed that silver ruble is the main means of payment. And for some time, the system was working pretty well. And maybe if we didn't have the Crimean War, it could have been working even further. But still, once the Crimean War happened, we had to issue additional amounts of credit notes again. So the process started again, as well as it started with assignations. And well, these were just my conclusion, because once I was reading all these papers, all these laws, it came to my mind that reformation of the financial system was really a long-term goal, but it could have been a short one. It could have been a short-term goal if Speransky managed to reach it in 1 year, just as according to his plan of finance. But unfortunately, all these factors brought this process on a long term. And especially I guess the no continuity in state financial policy, so that every new official was cancelling the decisions of the previous ones. so that we didn't have the stability in decisions that could bring us to a stable financial system. And as well as short-term goals that were accompanying the long-term one, increase of Russian ruble, assignation ruble value, and the points that I didn't manage to cover because of lack of time.
Thank you very much. So, because she was very exact on time, I propose we have some questions.
Just I would like to know fact. The first, the denomination of paper money or assignation, the give us the minimum face value of assignations or the face value of most popular the paper money. The first, and second, the relationship between silver ruble and copper coins. The exchange ratio was maybe officially the fixed, but it's the always the I don't know actual market exchange rate between silver and the copper coins, whether it fluctuated or not. And third, besides silver ruble, such a copper coins and the paper money always accepted in paying tax or not? Okay,
so the first question was, maybe I start with the last one, as far as I remember. Well, small copper coins were not used for paying taxes. Yes, and silver coins were used later on during conquering. Gold coins started to be used because the gold mining industry started to increase rapidly. This one. And platinum coins as well. Well, copper coins were in very small denomination and they were circulating just for some common deals for buying bread or something like that. And the middle question was it the ratio between silver and copper coins fixed? Yeah. Fixed or actual? Yeah, actually fluctuating or not. Fluctuating or not. There was a phenomenon in Russia that Vladimir did mention, the folk Asia. The premium that was happening not only for assignations but as well to silver coins. And as well as, well, in different regions, people could quote different exchange rates between the coins. Yeah. And what is interesting, Guriev was a person who even enforced this phenomenon in a Russian monetary system, putting into the law different exchange rates for paying taxes, customs revenues. Some people, if you do this deal, you pay by this exchange rate, another deal by another exchange rate. So he enforced even this phenomenon. Yeah. And the first question, could you please...
face value of the paper money. The minimum face value of paper money as assignation. The minimum value and the most popular value.
This probably... I have no information for that, but minimum value was one ruble of assignation, and maximum value. Usually, the maximum value for coins was, for assignations was, well, 25, 50, I think. But I might be mistaken, really.
That's the minimum, the one ruble paper money. Was sufficiently supplied or not?
Was sufficient to?
Sufficiently supplied.
Pardon?
Supplied.
Sufficient to be supplied to...
Quantity enough for trading.
For trading. Well, I guess it was not always... Well, it was constantly insufficient. That's why they were constantly printing the assignations. And the trend was always growing for the volume of assignations. And by the year of 1818, the amount was almost 800 million in comparison to 200 at the beginning of the century. So there was a need for assignations, but I guess it was also because they were losing their value and people had to then they were leading to a kind of inflation if they so. I guess that, yeah.
Yeah, to build on this point, I mean, we all know that Russia is a very huge country and that I guess most of the people is not is not introducing the monetary economy. because they just live in the countryside and they basically have no monetary transaction in their life. So I would like you to elaborate a little bit on what is the actual circulation of this kind of instrument issued by the state, because I mean I guess they issue it to buy stuff for the army and so on and so forth, and so I guess they are quite fairly concentrated in some parts of the economy, which is traders and some kind of special kinds of people who are the people who pay taxes, because I guess most of the people doesn't pay monetary taxes to the state because they are inserted in a feudal system, and also to put this in connection with the geographical network of the branches of the state bank or of the agency which issues this kind of instrument. And a second thing is that if you put this in international comparison, I mean the timing is very similar to the timing other countries face, because you have a lot of international geopolitical shocks. You have the Polish Wars, and then you have the Napoleonic Wars. So it would be nice to put this in and to see that the main reason why this finance reform failed is that you have huge geopolitical shocks. So they could not. It's not because they misbehave. It's just because they cannot implement these reforms.
Did I get you right that first of all, is it a question or a kind of a comment? Question. I guess that assignations, they were circulating all around the country. Well, definitely the main reason why they were printed was to cover the budget deficit. The second one was to cover the war expenses. And the third one was to give it to people to exchange it for internal trade and internal transactions, so it was not going out of the country. Then, as far as the geographical point is concerned, I think it was mostly concentrated around the cities that were close to Moscow and St. Petersburg, as there were trading centers. And so you think that there is a correlation between the geography and the popularity of the assignation as a means of payment, right? Well, it might be like that. I haven't studied this point so deeply because I was studying the monetary laws themselves. But it is really interesting point to study further. And the second question was, you were telling me that the failure of the reform...
Geopolitical shocks.
Yes, was due to geopolitical shocks, so due to wars mainly. I think that it was probably factor number one. That's why I put the war burden on the first point of the factor that influenced the failure of the first attempts to reach the silver standard, because it is definitely not possible to stabilize your monetary system when you have to pull up all the funds in order to fight against the enemy, right? So I do agree with you in that point. Have I answered your question? Thank you.
So just one short question. It's about your first hero. Was he in relation with foreigners? Because it's very interesting that you give in 1810 the fact that he published many notes. So it means that those reflections were present in him before that date, because he couldn't have produced so many notes in such a short time. So maybe he was informed of equivalent debates going on other places in Europe, most notably in the United Kingdom, in Sweden, or in France. And I was wondering whether he was speaking any foreign language, or if he had any relationship through diplomatic networks or through personal networks with foreigners engaged in such debates.
Thank you very much. You were speaking about Kaspersky, right?
Yes.
And well, I guess he was very much, I guess he knew, I don't know primarily, but I guess he knew the foreign languages because he was supporting the Adam Smith. So he was reading the foreign literature. And the first half of the question was concerning why he introduced the plan of finance so fastly. Why he introduced the laws so fastly just after the publishing of...
At least his notes. So he was
notes.
writing so many notes, so he must have had some ideas before.
Yeah, surely. I think he was forming his ideas just before he started to be state of a secretary of the state. And the thing is that he had already ideas not only concerning monetary system but concerning the administration that he has totally changed. And afterwards he started to think of monetary points. So before 1810, a huge background was made by him in other spheres. So in 1810 was the year once he started to try to implement his ideas according to plan of finance. And Kankrin was a person who was taking the ideas of Speransky. And I think, yes, he didn't manage to do it in time. Well, maybe he was influenced by European tendencies. Well, surely we all had the information about that, and Russia did a lot of things according to to foreign example, as well as printing the assignations. We've taken as everywhere. Yes, the point is that we were making it in our own way, and probably this is because the result was not as efficient as in other countries.